It's important we look at the facts.
Why? Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence.
And he clapped like a seal.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Planet Holyrood, where we're hopefully going to dissect the week in Scottish politics. And no, your eyes are not deceiving you. Paul Hutchin has not had a glamorous transformation. I am going to be standing in for him while he suns himself in Spain, I think it is. So thanks, Paul. Thanks for leaving this up to us. So I'm Hannah Rodger, the chief reporter at the Sunday Mail. And I'm joined today by Ben Borland, the editor of the Scottish Daily Express, and Chris McCall, who is the deputy political editor at the Daily Record. So welcome to both of you. So I think just on a sort of serious note, we'll just start off with a bit of breaking news actually that's just come in about Winnie Ewing, who's sadly died. It's just been announced in the past hour. So I thought we could maybe, just kind of, I guess if Chris, do you want to maybe talk us through a bit about, why is Winnie Ewing, who is she, why is she so significant, I suppose, to Scottish politics in general?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to overestimate just how big an influence Winnie Ewing was on the SNP. When she became an MP in 1967 at the Hamilton by-election, the SNP had only ever returned one MP before, and that had been in 1945, and they hadn't lasted very long. So when Winnie Ewing won in 1967, it really was an earth-shattering event in British politics. It completely stunned the Labour Party at the time, who were by far and away the dominant force in Scottish politics, particularly in the Central Belt. So her victory then proved that the SNP was turning from a sort of fringe protest movement into a more modern political party that was capable of winning elections. And that act in itself probably would have been enough to secure her, place in history, in political history. But she went on to do much, much more than that. She was an MEP, a member of the European Parliament, a very prominent member of the European Parliament. And then after that, she became the very first presiding officer at the Scottish Parliament when it reopened in 1999. So she really was a familiar face to anyone that kind of followed Scottish politics throughout the 20th century. And she then became a sort of, a huge figure in the party right up until, I think the party had a fairly big celebration for her 90th birthday. So she effectively, in the modern SNP, she feels like she was around forever, and her loss, I know, will be felt by people in the party very, very deeply.
Yeah, and Ben, obviously Winnie Ewing, it's not the sort of political, the politics didn't just stop with Winnie Ewing. We've got Ewing is quite a common surname now among Scottish politicians. Do you want to tell us a bit about, I guess her sort of legacy and her other family members who've now gone into Scottish politics as well, who aren't very shy and retiring like she wasn't. So,
well, no, she did kind of a rare thing in politics, in Scottish politics. A genuine political dynasty. Obviously, very sad news. Commiserations to all her family. People probably these days will be more familiar with some of the next generation. Fergus Ewing has obviously been in the news a lot this week, and has made a name for himself as something of a backbench rebel recently in the SNP.
Yeah.
The daughter Annabelle Ewing as well also became an MP and an MSP. I think as well, it probably shows how the SNP's changed. I mean, I don't want, obviously it's a sad announcement, I don't want to sort of analyse it too much, but it perhaps shows how the SNP's changed, in that certainly Fergus represents kind of this old, slightly more old-fashioned party. The Ewing dynasty, if you like, they're very much a Perthshire, Stirlingshire rural family. And for years, that was the SNP's heartlands, up in Angus, up in Perthshire, where it's changed now to being kind of a much more metropolitan party. And perhaps Fergus Ewing clearly disagrees with the direction that the party's going. So I think this is probably a time when everyone in the SNP will maybe take stock, and perhaps they might think, look, do we really need to be fighting among ourselves like this? Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite rare, I think, for a politician to attract such kind of kind words and tributes from not just from within their own party, but across the political spectrum. And we've seen that just in the past hour. You know, you've got Alex Salmond, Douglas Ross, Nicola Sturgeon. I'm not entirely sure if Anas Sarwar said anything yet, but I'm sure he will. You know, it's kind of well accepted that she was just a kind of class act, really, and she seems to have been very well respected from all sides, even if they didn't agree, obviously, with all of her politics. But yeah, so I think, you know, if we go on to talk a little bit about her son Fergus Ewing and what he's been up to this week, it kind of ties into our next issue, which is about the deposit return scheme. I feel like we've been talking about this issue for the past, 6 months at least, and it's just become a bit of a nightmare, really, for the Scottish government. Ben, are you maybe able to talk us through a bit of what has been happening with it just in the last kind of couple of weeks and where we are with the deposit return scheme? And then, we'll go on to talk about, obviously, the latest developments in terms of Fergus Ewing and Lorna Slater and things. But could you talk us through a bit about, where we're at with it now?
Well, where we are with it is it's finished. It's the company that was set up to run the DRS has gone into administration. 60 jobs have gone. There was we've covered this many times, that there was an opportunity to go ahead with a slightly amended scheme on the planned start date of March next year. It would have been a pilot scheme for a UK scheme. I think everyone accepts that the only way this works is as a UK scheme. The only people who don't seem to accept that are the Scottish government. There was an opportunity to go ahead. It was without glass, but Circularity Scotland, everybody said, look, this works. If you want to do it, go ahead. And it seems to me, in a kind of fit of pique, Humza Yousaf and Lorna Slater simply pulled the plug, and now we're waiting for the UK scheme to begin probably 2025. So basically, business has been marched up the hill and then marched back down again. The whole thing's been a complete waste of time. It's been a complete waste of money, waste of energy, waste of newsprint. The whole thing's a disaster. And in any other devolved national, any other town council, a community council who made such a mess of a project would sack the person who was in charge of it.
Maybe not a community council, to be fair, because they
well, not many members, true. It was probably inevitable that a motion of no confidence came forward. As we were discussing earlier, Fergus Ewing has been a critic of the DRS, along with many other backbench rebels. He was the only one with the backbone to actually vote for Lorna Slater to be removed from her ministerial post. Some of the others were whipped into line by the SNP whips at Holyrood. And she survives, she clings on. I'm not sure what she's got left to do as a minister. Her one job has been, an absolute disaster. So I guess she's minister for absolutely nothing for the next 4 years.
And Chris, would you kind of agree with that? What are you picking up from Holyrood in terms of Fergus Ewing's rebellion, and how's that going down? Can you tell us a bit about
it's
that?
important to say that, firstly, that Fergus Ewing isn't the only one in the SNP who viewed the deposit return scheme as a total disaster. Ben is right to say that he has been, one of the few to actually stand up and, honestly and clearly speak his mind on this issue when others have been more quiet. But remember, back in the SNP leadership campaign, Kate Forbes made it pretty plain that if she had become the next SNP leader, then she would have quickly got rid of the deposit return scheme. Because let's remember, before this became a bun fight between Holyrood and Westminster, there were plenty businesses, and not the gigantic corporations, like small businesses, like the kinds that employed like a handful of people. They were shouting into the void for a while, saying this could put us out of business. And without going over all the details again, the opposition to this policy has been building for quite a while. And there was a feeling that the Scottish Government, and by extension Lorna Slater, the minister responsible, were just not prepared to listen on this. And I think that really angered a lot of people. There is a sort of acceptance that we need some sort of deposit return scheme. There's an acceptance we need to drive up recycling, and everybody wants to see less litter on the streets. But the way that this policy was handled has been a disaster, frankly. And we're going to be dealing with the fallout for some time to come. Ben said it's a waste of newsprint, but I don't see us filling pages with other policy disasters on this scale anytime soon. So I think, Circularity Scotland, the firm set up to monitor the deposit return scheme, that's now teetering on the brink and will probably collapse sooner rather than later, which is terrible, number one, for the people that work there. There's also a terrible waste of taxpayers' money, as they got a £9 million loan from the Scottish National Investment Bank, which is paid for by taxpayers, and its boss this week said it's unlikely we'll get any of that back. So it's not just shrug your shoulders and say, oh well, we tried. The outcome is it's been a colossal waste of money, and it's not going to prevent any litter on the streets anytime soon. So nobody wins, really, apart from political journalists who, will be gnashing their teeth amongst us about this for God knows how long to come.
Yeah. And what obviously Fergus Ewing did go, he went against his own government to say he didn't have confidence in Lorna Slater. Are either of you sort of picking anything up about what the repercussions might be?
Oh yeah. So obviously Fergus has experienced a huge personal loss today. So obviously it's changed the. I think it's fair to say that the rumours of him being sacked will probably they will be put aside, and hit the discipline party issue, because Fergus has repeatedly voted against the Scottish Government now, and some in the party, have, including the former party's media chief, Money Foot, have vocally said it's about time that, he was made an example of, because other MSPs, to be frank, wouldn't be given this amount of leeway. Now, Fergus obviously is a veteran MSP. He's, been around the block, and he's got nothing left to lose at this stage of his career. So he probably thinks, I can say my mind and do what I like as an MSP now in a way that younger MSPs can't. But yeah, there has been anger, real anger at the way he has behaved, voting against the government persistently. And the context this week with Lorna Slater, now many people in the Parliament believe Lorna Slater hasn't performed adequately enough as a minister. But this was a motion brought by the Scottish Conservatives. So to see an SNP, MSP vote in favour of a Tory motion, that it really, really hacked off a lot of people, to put it mildly. And what the outcome of that will probably be decided later now, obviously, given the circumstances. But I mean, certainly yesterday, a day is a long time in politics, but yesterday, everybody was saying, well, he's not just going to get a temporary suspension. Humza could take a much tougher line, and he could be booted out of the Parliament. Out of the party altogether. whether that is the case now remains to be seen.
Chris, you maybe can answer this one. I don't know if you've got the numbers at your fingertips. If Fergus was booted out, what does that do with the majority?
I think that
one majority. If
to lose by one, I think. Someone was going to correct me, but I think the Green and SNP power sharing deal, means that they have more than a majority of one. I'm sure. So to lose any MSP, wouldn't be. It's not going to be great, but I think they could calculate it. They could live with it.
They could live with what? But then if some others were to follow him,
well, yeah, of course. I mean, would others follow? Now that would be something that would keep SNP party managers up at night, I'm sure. But maybe they're gambling that Fergus is the only one that has the sort of thick skin to go through this and wouldn't care if he got kicked out. Whereas I think maybe others, not to name them, they wouldn't be ready to lose the SNP whip at this stage. They would rather be inside the tent for now.
I mean, what do you think this says about? Obviously when we saw the Butte House Agreement being signed and Nicola Sturgeon was obviously still the First Minister, and it was kind of portrayed as this, fascinating, new, amazing thing, and the SNP are all delighted. But, Fergus Ewing aside, because we know that he's not a big fan of the Greens, does it tell us anything else about, how the SNP view the Greens? I'm getting the sense that not everyone is delighted about this partnership, but I don't know what either of you have kind of picked up around that. Ben?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's been, there was probably some reluctance at first. It seemed always to be a bit of a marriage of convenience because Nicola Sturgeon had a minority administration last time around that relied on the Greens to get the budget deals through. The Greens always voted in support, but they were always kind of given something in the budget. They'd be given, some of those votes of no confidence in John Swinney, for instance. The Greens always seemed to ride to the rescue. So there was an unofficial partnership. So I think when the Butte House Agreement was signed, probably a lot of SNP figures thought, well, we're just formalising our unofficial relationship, and we'll still be in charge. The vast majority of policies that the government pursues will be SNP policies. As it's turned out, it seems almost that, I know the Tories say this a lot, but the green tail wagging the yellow dog. An awful lot of the policies seem to be green policies. The marine protected areas, and even if they start out as SNP, they become, they've become kind of de facto green policies. And I think that there must be people within the SNP. I'm not particularly well plugged into the party, but there must be people within the SNP, more than just Fergus Ewing, Ash Regan and Kate Forbes, the kind of rebel trio on the back benches who are unhappy about this. There must be.
Yeah, I mean, do you think though, Chris, do you think that these policies, like you're mentioning, highly protected marine areas, the DRS, what else we had, obviously GRA, is it fair to say that they're green policies that are, the government are just trying to enact, the SNP government, or are people spinning it as, this is a green policy when actually it was the SNP in the first place?
I think that's fair. I mean, the deposit return scheme, for example, this was something the SNP had been working on for quite a while, long before the power sharing deal with the Greens was signed. Now, obviously, the Greens were fully on board with it and were, supportive of it. But the mess that it's become, the blame for it can't be laid squarely at Lorna Slater's door. Now, that's not to say that Lorna Slater couldn't have handled this better. Of course, she could have. And her engagement with businesses, in particular on this matter, shows that, she does deserve some criticism, it's fair to say. But I think the wider issue with the Greens is maybe one of perception, because critics of the Greens, particularly on the right and amongst Conservatives, they always repeat the line that the Greens are anti-growth, because one of the sort of founding philosophies of the Green Party, not just in Scotland but elsewhere, is that the demand for economic growth year on year, which is kind of an accepted good thing in the world of politics. The Greens say, well, why does it have to be? They make other arguments saying that we should be measuring prosperity and people's, life chances in a different way. They argue that growth upon growth is actually a bad thing. Now, whether or not that's right is obviously, it's up to individuals. But in the world of politics, that becomes a weapon to bash over the head of the Greens. People call them economically naive. They're not interested in creating jobs. They're not interested in, wider prosperity. And not to paint too crude a picture, but some on the right would say the Greens would be happier if we were all living in caves again, or etc., all this kind of stuff. But the amount of mud that's thrown at the Greens on this point does stick. So when they enter government and suddenly they have their their hands on the economic levers of power, to a limited extent in Scotland, admittedly, then it becomes a different thing, and their critics ramp up and say, why have they been let loose in government? They're not responsible, they're not a mature political party, etc., etc. So you then get policies that have been led by Green ministers such as Lorna Slater not going as well. It kind of adds to this overall image. An image the Greens would say is nothing but a crude caricature, but it's the image nonetheless that they're not serious when it comes to the big issues. They're just a single focused protest party that care about the environment. They don't know what they're doing on the wider sort of economic issues. So that's something the Greens need to counter, frankly. And, they have done it to, you look at Europe, nations like Germany, the Greens have been in government there a very, very long time. And I'm sure over time, the Greens will be kind of viewed differently, even by their opponents. But right now, they get a lot of mud thrown at them, and it sticks.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think the sort of Euro Greens are definitely taken a lot more seriously. They're seen as sort of proper politicians compared to, the Greens in the UK in various parts. As you say, they're not seen as kind of as competent, definitely, as, for example, in Germany or Austria or anything like this. I'd
argue that we don't need them. I don't think we need the
of course you would, Ben, of course.
Well, I don't think the party's needed. Every party, even the Tories, are fully signed up to the environment and tackling climate change and the importance of kind of biodiversity. I don't think you'll find a mainstream party that doesn't have these green policies at heart. So the Greens kind of, the whole green part of their ethos is redundant. So they've just become a very, very sort of hard left political party. And, you barely hear them talk about the environment. They talk about wider political issues rather than green issues. SNP, Labour, everyone's signed up to the green agenda. I don't think there's a need for there even to be a green party. But I'm sure everyone agrees.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there will be some people who agree with you. Okay, should we move on to, I feel like it wouldn't be a week without, in Scottish politics, without the deposit return scheme nonsense, but also, unfortunately, without talking about Nicola Sturgeon, because once again, Nicola Sturgeon has had a bit of a interesting week, so to speak. So obviously she was arrested and then questioned by the police and released without charge last weekend. But in the last week, she has made a return to Parliament, but not before holding a press conference outside her house, where she repeated her assertion that she's done nothing wrong. And she also insisted that she is also entitled to privacy. Ben, I'll put this one to you, I think, just because I feel like your answer will be I'm interested to see what your answer will be, but what do you make of this? First of all, what do you make of the way that Nicola Sturgeon has, handled this scenario, like since she was arrested, but then also this, demand for privacy? Do you think that she's entitled to privacy given what's been going on, or what do you think?
I think she's entitled to privacy. I think it's quite unusual for politicians to give press conferences, impromptu or otherwise, on their front lawns. I think it's kind of. I'm sure steps could be taken to keep the media away from the house if she so desired. So to then say I want privacy, but by the way, I'm going to do, I think that's the second impromptu front lawn press conference she's given. No, I mean, I think she everyone's entitled to privacy. Obviously, it's a live investigation. She's been released pending further inquiries. We'll wait and see what happens. I mean, I'm not sure I would have made this point had others not done so already, given that it is a live case, but it was noted that she has 3 times now declared her own innocence. However, when she was asked, does that apply to your husband, Peter Murrell, the former SNP chief executive, she didn't reply. Obviously, it's up to him to make his own statement in the case, but he hasn't spoken at all since he was released from police custody. And Nicola Sturgeon doesn't seem inclined to declare his innocence on his behalf.
Yeah.
If you can read anything into that other than she can only speak for herself, but that was
it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it's like, obviously we as journalists are entitled to ask the question, but really she couldn't give an answer that would be completely, either way it would be, people could read something into whatever kind of answer she gave. So I guess it's a kind of tricky one. But Chris, what do you make of, obviously we've seen these calls for Humza Yousaf to suspend Nicola Sturgeon, and there's people, and I would say probably quite rightly, saying, well, Nicola Sturgeon would suspend herself if she was still the First Minister. What do you make of the fact that Humza is not going to go there? Do you think that is a sign of him, just the way he wants to lead the party and deal with issues like this? Or do you feel like he's only behaving like this because it's Nicola Sturgeon?
I think that's a very good point. Would Nicola Sturgeon have sacked or suspended Nicola Sturgeon? I have to think that, yes, she would have. Michelle Thompson, her case, a very different set of circumstances back when she was an MP in 2015, but she was not subject to any criminal investigation. But as we've subsequently learned, she lost the party whip very, very quickly. Obviously, she latterly was readmitted to the party, is now an MSP, but many have looked at the case of Michelle Thompson and now look at the circumstances in which Nicola Sturgeon finds herself in and thinks, well, why hasn't she voluntarily stepped back? Now, Nicola Sturgeon, when she was in the Scottish Parliament this week, she attempted to argue that by remaining in the party, she's effectively showing that she's got nothing to hide and that she's innocent, as if to say that stepping back to the party would almost be an admission of guilt. Now, many do disagree with that. I think those in the SNP that disagree with that, they will keep pretty quiet about it. I think there has been a clampdown on sort of party unity on this issue. The meeting last week in the Scottish Parliament amongst the MSPs, which Humza Yousaf led, has been contradictory reports on exactly what Humza Yousaf told his MSPs. The First Minister said afterwards that he said, I'm telling you, you have to be in favour of independence. If you want to be in this party, you need to speak up for it. Does that by extension mean you've got to be pro Nicola Sturgeon? Wouldn't be for me to make that suggestion. But certainly it's extraordinary circumstances that the party finds themselves in. You could almost argue that Nicola Sturgeon is too big within the party to be suspended, that to suspend her would almost be to suggest that the party couldn't function properly. So where we are now, we really, like previous weeks gone by, and after the period where Peter Murrow and Colin Beattie were arrested in April, we're now kind of waiting to see where Operation Branchfoot and the police investigation goes next. Right now, it looks like Nicola Sturgeon is going anywhere. And on your second point about Humza Yousaf and how he's handling this, I mean, Humza obviously was very much the Sturgeon continuity candidate. There are those that's a good thing and those that certainly viewed it as a bad thing long before her arrest. But the continuity candidate he is, and many of his advisors, many people in the party held similar, if not exactly the same roles as Nicola Sturgeon when she was First Minister. So there is obviously a huge degree of loyalty to her, and they obviously take her at her word when she says, "I am innocent," and they think, well, that's fine, you say you're innocent, we'll take that, we're not going to suspend you, we're going to carry on, you can remain as an MSP. The question is, how much damage will that do to the party? I mean, obviously, polls suggest that their lead in Westminster voting intentions is narrowing. One poll suggesting that Labour's overtaking them. How many bad polls will Humza and the team around them take? Only time will tell, I guess.
Yeah. And very, very quickly, because we have been very SNP heavy, Ben, can you just talk us through a little bit about, obviously, Keir Starmer a few weeks ago made some comments about North Sea oil, and this kind of set the cat amongst the pigeons a little bit, and we're seeing the ramifications of that this week. But can you tell us a little bit about it, and if you think
absolutely. I mean, this kind of touches back on what I was saying before about all the mainstream parties now have environmentally friendly policies at their heart. Keir Starmer indicated that if he becomes Prime Minister, he would refuse new drilling licenses in the North Sea. And he gave a speech this week in Edinburgh that really basically just confirmed that, and he put it out there that this is, if Labour get in and if he becomes Prime Minister, that would really signal the beginning of the end for the North Sea oil and gas industry. And no new licenses would mean gradually the existing fields are shut down. He says we can transition, there's this phrase, a just transition, and we can transition to renewable energy. I mean, I'm not sure people in the industry believe that there's the same amount of well-paid jobs or anything like the same amount of well-paid jobs in renewables as there are in oil and gas. The Conservatives, I can tell you, are rubbing their hands with glee. They feel like this is a huge old goal by Labour and will really, really damage the party, especially in the northeast of Scotland, where they hope
there's a Labour councillor up in Aberdeen who's quit the party.
There is, yeah. Barney Crockett, former provost of Aberdeen's quit and said, well, I just can't be in the party anymore. It may, I'm sure Keir Starmer has balanced the number of MPs and the number of votes he's going to get in the northeast of Scotland to the number of votes he's going to get across the UK from perhaps younger voters who are very, very switched on to the question of climate change and the question of fossil fuels. And he's obviously made the decision that overall Labour are going to get more votes from people who are, attracted to this policy of let's push for net zero, but clearly they're going to lose votes in the northeast. The Tories see an opportunity to mop up those votes that are shifting from the SNP, may have gone to Labour, will probably, they hope, now go to the Conservatives.
Okay, well, I think we've talked about all the major things this week. So do you want to just do our good week, bad week before we finish up? Chris, who have you gone for?
So it's been a good week for SNP MP John Nicholson, and the reason I've gone with him is that parliamentary authorities at Westminster have cleared him of bullying the former Conservative minister and non-Tory peer Nadine Dorries after he liked tweets that described her, and I quote, grotesque and a vacuous goon. Basically, so the parliamentary authorities decided this was not bullying behaviour on Nicholson's part. And one of the reasons that they gave for that was basically what. Sorry, I'm laughing here. It's Nadine Dorries' own record of tweeting. Now, anyone in social media that follows politics will have known that Nadine was fairly forthright in her opinions, you could say, but her own record was used as a defence of Nicholson. And basically, because she'd made broad complaints about, sorry, I beg your pardon, broad complaints were made against her own tweeting, that the parliamentary authorities decided that John Nicholson, in this case, was not really a bully. Now, the reason I've kind of picked that as well as I think it kind of quite neatly sums up the often mad, frequently bewildering, and sometimes horrible world of social media when it comes to politics, because we all like to, believe in this fancy notion that somehow social media, everyone could be on their best behaviour and conduct themselves in a polite manner at all times. But, we know the reality is it's never going to be like that. It's a sliding scale of people tweeting hot takes and shouting their mouths off. And John Nicholson and Nadine Dorries are a reminder that when it comes to politicians, they can be every bit as bad or every bit as good as everybody else, really.
Was your bad week?
So bad week, I have gone for Lorna Slater. Now, not to repeat myself all over again, but we know the deposit return scheme is a mess. There was a vote of no confidence against her. She survived that. She remains a government minister, but she's had a really bad week. Critics are, taking more and more pot shots at her. She faces all kinds of awkward questions on the mess that is Circularity Scotland and a deposit return scheme. And I don't think the furor being aimed at her is going to die down anytime soon.
Ben, who have you gone for?
So, bad week. Humza Yousaf.
No surprises there.
No surprises
Tell us
there.
why?
I think the problem he's got is he never seems to have a good week. This hasn't been a particularly bad week, but it's just been yet another week where, they've had a vote of no confidence in one of his ministers. He's got a rebellion from one of the most popular MSPs in the party. He's got the SNP Independence Conference this weekend, and then we got the agenda, and he seems to be kind of almost a sideshow at the event. There's all kinds of people with larger billing than he has and coming up with different ideas. I think it just shows the party's in disarray. He still hasn't managed to get a grip. He hasn't managed to, we're almost at the summer recess, and he's never actually imposed himself on Holyrood. FMQs today was another waffle fest. The guy's floundering, in my opinion. I mean, this is Holyrood politics. I think on another political podcast, Boris Johnson's had a very bad week, but we'll not go there. Humza Yousaf, just for another decidedly average week. Good week. Charles III, I think, he did very, great PR from the Windrush anniversary. His heart's in the right place. Trooping the Colour was another marvellous spectacle at the weekend. And we've had details this week of the King and Queen coming to Scotland for a ceremony at St Giles Cathedral next month, where he'll be presented with the honours of Scotland, the crown jewels. It'd be another great occasion. I think it'd be another sort of step in the process of kind of moving on from his mother. I think obviously the last time the nation's attention was on St Giles. It was under very different, very sad circumstances. So this will be a good occasion to sort of move on. And obviously it's Scotland Week, so there'll be all sorts of events. So it's a good week for the King.
Very good. And will you be in the front row, Ben, at St Giles?
It's a Wednesday, so no, I'll be working, unfortunately. If there's anyone listening who could send an invite to the garden party at Holyrood House, that would be nice. But no,
yeah. Oh, well, thank you to both of you for joining me. I'm sure you'll all be delighted when Paul returns next week. But until then, cheerio.
Cheers.
I think it's important we look at the facts.
Why? Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence. And he clapped like a seal.